Well, hi everyone out there. Welcome to the storytelling panel. My name is John Cates. We've got a great, awesome panel of folks to talk about storytelling as it relates to sports and nonprofit. We'll start by introducing ourselves. Each of us is going to give a little bit of our expertise, and then we're going to finish with a Q&A, but also feel free to ask questions as we go and type them in the chat. And we'll do our best to answer them as we go, and hopefully this will create a pretty lively back and forth. So I'll start by introducing myself. My name is John Cates. I'm in Chicago. I own a creative agency called Cates Collaborative. We're a creative services and video production company. I'm likely the only member of the panel that's not specifically related to sports and nonprofit, but as a professional storyteller and a teacher of storytelling that I at the Second City, which for those of you who don't know is a comedy theater here in Chicago. I hope to bring some expertise in terms of storytelling as a whole.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Sab Singh. I'm a professor of sport management at Farmingdale State College in New York. I'm based in New York City. The college is out on Long Island. So my participation, on the panel though comes from my work with Sports Doing Good. So it's a blog newsletter that I've been doing now for about 8 years, in which now it's every 2 weeks we highlight good things in sports. I mean, as simple as that. We try to be inclusive when it comes to that. So it's great performances, it's charity, it's philanthropy. So I'll talk a little bit about, sort of the sources of stories for me, what I look for when someone's looking to get their story told through the newsletter. So I'll be a little bit more on the distribution side. So nice to meet everyone.
Hi everyone, I'm Amy Fuller. I'm the Vice President of Communications for the Western Golf Association and Evans Scholars Foundation. So our mission is championships and scholarships. We run the BMW Championship, which is a PGA Tour FedEx Cup playoff event that was held in September at Olympia Fields. And on the charity side, we run the Evans Scholars Foundation, which provides full housing and tuition college scholarships to over 1,000 students who are attending 19 universities nationwide. So I oversee all of the internal and external communications for our organization. And I'm going to talk a little bit about just kind of what we had to do this year to pivot. There obviously was a bigger reliance than ever on digital. And so it really changed the way that we do everything, hold meetings, host fundraising events, and then in terms of the messaging, it changed that as well. So I'm happy to be here and provide a couple of case study examples for how we dealt with this crazy year.
And I'm Seth Rosenzweig. I am the CEO of an organization called Team Impact. We work with kids who are living with serious and chronic illness, who are struggling socially and emotionally, and provide them with a therapeutic program by embedding them into the fabric of a college athletic team for about a 2-year experience. I have been in the social sector my entire career, and both at large nonprofits that were very established, like Boston Children's Hospitals, and organizations like Team Impact, which I would say are more evolving, not startup, but evolving organizations, but definitely need to figure out our strategy to differentiate and disrupt in a very crowded marketplace.
Great, thanks all. So yeah, with that, I would just love to start this conversation. Like I said, my background is in teaching storytelling as a performance art. I did that at the Second City Comedy Theater. I started this program teaching personal storytelling to those who wanted to be stand-up comedians. So I learned a lot, some the hard way about what makes for effective storytelling. And I've translated that, what I've learned and taught there, into my professional life as a creative director. I work on branded content and advertising. And I found that there's some real common themes in effective storytelling that translates throughout. And in the time that we have here, I'm going to just kind of focus on my favorite. And I think it applies. I know we probably have a very diverse professional audience out there. When we're talking about storytelling professionally, it can mean a lot of different things. It can mean sales, it can mean pitching ideas to a client, it can mean fundraising on behalf of your organization and trying to develop some folks to be interested in what you're doing. So what is it when we're telling stories that makes it so effective? I found that in the creative process of developing a personal story, there's a simple thing that I like to do that is very effective, and that is I ask the question at every stage of it as to whether are we giving or are we taking. And specifically what that means is, are we considering our audience first when we tell a story before we ask them for something? As that relates to a individual performer or stand-up, if you're, you want to get something from the audience, or do you want to give something to the audience? In other words, are you asking them to feel something for you? Are you trying to give them some insight that they can feel about themselves? What's obviously more effective when you're trying to win somebody over or convince somebody to do something, you want your story to have some empathy. You want it to relate to them in a way that isn't just about you telling them what you want, but rather giving them some thoughts on what you can, on how it relates to them. So I would imagine as it relates to the world of fundraising, ask yourself, what is it I'm trying to get from this story? Do I want their money? Do I want their time? Do I want them to volunteer? Well, think first, what do I want them to feel, right? So how do I get them to feel something good about what I'm doing so that they can want to be a part of it? So, at the heart of effective communication, you want them to feel something because that is how you can develop some authenticity. Authenticity comes from empathy, and the empathy comes from understanding, where your story relates in their lives. If you're fundraising, for an example, it's fine to ask for something. If you're fundraising, there's no way around that. But make sure you're showing them consideration for the audience before you make that ask. Give them the respect. Give them some insight into how what your organization does affects them, and most importantly, give them a reason to support what you do. I imagine there'd be some questions around that too, but I'd like to open up to the panel to kind of give some thoughts, some examples of how the work that they do might show, some giving in the storytelling that they do.
Well, John, I'll jump in just to, again, more on the be the receiver of the story that's being told. The way that I collect stories for Sports Doing Good is finding articles that have been published other places. So it's very much, kind of for me trying to keep abreast of what's going on, having a diverse set of sources from which to pull the stories. But I do get, and I've been doing this for 8 years, I have been contacted over the last 8 years more and more directly by organizations, nonprofits, sports nonprofits who are working in the field. And to your point, giving versus taking, I agree 100%. I think the best thing for me, obviously their take is, hey, can you put me in the newsletter, or can you get me out on social media? But I'd say the best sort of pitches are the ones that do tell a story, saying, this is who we are, this is a particular situation, here's some background on it, and this is why we think it's good for your newsletter. So the give is, hey, here's a story that we think is valuable for your newsletter. So they understand what the newsletter is, which would be, for anyone, understanding what your audience, John, as you mentioned, what your audience is looking for. So I'm looking for an article to put into a newsletter or something I can put on social media. Different audiences maybe look for different things, but they want something they can latch on to. And I think that's where the giving comes into play with regard to storytelling.
Yeah, I can jump in here too. So I think for us, one of the biggest sources of stories that really resonate with our audience is the stories of our scholars. So to earn a scholarship, you have to have financial need, have caddied for 3 or 4 years at a local golf or country club, and then have good grades and outstanding leadership qualities. And once these kids, so a lot of these kids, they apply for the full college scholarship and they're awarded it. and then they go on to, a 4-year college where they hopefully get a degree. So in theory, they have their whole college education paid for it. So it's a phenomenal, really unique scholarship that really plays off these qualities that kids have already shown that they've had through caddying on the golf course, hard work and determination and work ethic and all of that. And these kids all have stories of adversity because they all have financial need. We have a good majority of our students who are first generation students. Some of them have had parents that have passed away, or they've dealt with big health issues in their families. So there's a lot of these challenges that these students have already gone through, just a tremendous amount of adversity to be able to get to where they are now. And so we use our scholars to help tell our stories. And there's really nobody better that could do that than these kids themselves. So at our fundraising events, we usually always try to have a scholar speaker who can share their story. And a lot of times, we try to make it as authentic as possible. We've experimented over the years with very rehearsed, very practice speeches, and then we've really kind of gone the opposite, and we try to take somebody who has the qualities that we think will be very good, that they're very articulate, that they have a good public presence, and then we kind of just maybe give them an outline or have a broad idea of what they're going to say, and then we just kind of let them go up there. So there's so many different ways that this can work, but for us, our scholar voice and our scholar story is the most important thing that we've got to sell to the audience and to really share their story. And then from the receiving end, that's the number one question we've gotten this year. And we get questions about our tournaments. Can we go to the tournaments? Are there going to be spectators? But I would say in our audience, the number one question that we got this year was, how are the students doing on campus? What does this year look like for them? Are they struggling? Are they doing okay? How are they coping? And so that kind of is a reminder to me that, we can go off on different tangents and we can, say thank you to our donors, which we do, but it always comes back to the scholar, what they've gone through and how much this scholarship has changed their life.
I think just to add into what Amy was saying from a practical standpoint, the first thing when I look at storytelling, I think we oftentimes feel like we want to send everything in the kitchen sink right away. I think what I found works really, really well is what you really need to accomplish is what flag are you trying to plant in the ground? What do you stand for? And what's your why, right? Sometimes we lead as organizations with kind of the what and the how, here's what I do, versus the why. And I think for me, being able to have an authentic way of getting people to truly understand why you exist, what problem are you trying to solve, how are you different from other organizations out there, especially for a young nonprofit like ours. We were often compared to, oh, you're kind of like Make-A-Wish meets Big Brother Big Sister. And it's no, I want to tell you my story and our story. I don't want to be compared to someone else's story. They do great work. And I think for us, it was really about taking that step back and really saying, why do we exist? What would happen if we didn't exist? And from there, it's about, storytelling is more challenging these days because you have to tell your story on not only to your different stakeholders, but you also have to tell it based on the different channels and vehicles. And so I think it actually becomes more challenging. We can't just tell, I think as John said in the beginning, we can't just, we have a lot of stakeholders. So what I say to donors versus what I say to hospital partners versus what I say to, college athletic teams to want to buy in and join my program. The authenticity of the why is still the same, but the way that we talk about it is a little bit different. So I think being able to craft your message so you can adapt and be agile to whatever audience you work. Plus, I'm not going to say the same thing on Facebook that I am going to say on Twitter, that I'm going to say on a newsletter, that I'm going to say face-to-face with a donor. And understanding short form versus long form and really how you can use your channels effectively matter a lot. I think in COVID, in this situation, what we found ourselves in, instead of telling the why in terms of the big why we exist, it was more about what are we doing in this moment, right? It was a lot of misperception. Oh my God, college athletics aren't even being played. Professional sports aren't being played. So you guys probably can't even function. And we had to basically break through that misinformation and say, actually, let me tell you why we're more of an imperative than ever. Let me tell you why the medical community needs us more, because they cannot provide those non-essential therapies in the hospital setting. And they need to be focused on the front line. Yeah, the coaches can't coach right now because there's no games, but they still have to coach. And they still want to ensure that their players have a strong mental health and that they can come together as a unit and make a difference. And I think for us, it was really about, one, we had to make sure we could pivot our program, right, to actually function in a virtual world, which we have, right? So we're fully virtually operating right now and developed a full curriculum around it. But two, we had actually like say a different story to all of our stakeholders to ensure that they knew that, one, we still existed and that we still could operate, and two, like, what's the case for support? And for us, it was a much stronger case for support, not to say like, we need your help keeping the lights on, versus like, actually, these kids are more isolated than ever. Here's why this program matters even more to them. And for us, be able to like use that moment to actually position ourselves during COVID was really, really helpful to, I think, for people who I think initially assumed, oh gosh, they probably can't even run. I feel badly, and let me write a token check, versus actually, you know what, let me invest here because they can help more and more kids that can't get help anywhere else. So I think all of those things played well for us. But as a young organization, it's hard. I mean, it's hard to break through. You don't have a lot of money. You have to be creative. And I think that like the way we've done it with our board is, you know, as we were able to like craft our story and get success, you know, that's when they're going to invest more in your ability to like distribute your story, right? You can have the greatest story in the world, but if you can't get it out there to those who you want to hear it, you're in a really challenging position. And I think I think you got to get proof of concept. You got to figure out really what you're trying to do with your story, who you're trying to impact, how you're going to measure your results. And then from there, look at scalability, and hopefully your board buys in that they can see the return, either the social return on investment or the overall return on investment from investing and getting your story out there. So those are just some initial thoughts from you know, the nonprofit that I run is you know, your why matters. Lead with why.
That's a great point. And you mentioned too, Seth, the scalability of it, which gets me thinking about, you know, the specificity of a story told to a specific audience, right? So you find that as you're out there, you know, trying to talk to a specific group, that it helps to edit the story down to something that's got a finer point on it, rather than trying to you know, put too much out there that makes it hard to consume.
Yeah, I think like I always said, like everyone's like, oh, what's your elevator pitch? And I'm like, well, nothing was really sold in an elevator. So let me actually tell you, like, yes, I want to get like a short form, like get you in, get you excited about it. And then once you're in, I can go deeper. I think from like overall, you know, using your channels, like for us, and Amy, I'd love to hear your opinion about this. Like for us, like we were always leading with like, oh my, these great stories of like resilience and like, you know, seeing this child who was battling cancer, and you see like before, you know, isolated, lonely, no friends around them, not able to go to school, really struggling. And then you saw the after, and you saw like, you know, a child who has confidence, is resilient, probably better health outcomes, et cetera. But we were missing in there is like the data and the outcomes. And so I think for us, like, it's like balancing like the great content and like heart-wrenching stories of like resiliency with like, actually, you need to prove that you're actually making a difference and that it's because of you that this child and family. So I think you have to balance like great, like general, like creative stories with like data and metrics that show. I think every nonprofit now is really focused on being a data-driven, you know, outcomes-driven organization. I think you probably need to balance both.
Yeah, that is something that we're really going through right now. We've got a data committee set up where we're really trying to measure the impact that we have. I would say that our organization is really incredibly lucky that we have a core group of 800 WGA directors who are basically our boots on the ground volunteers at different country and golf and country clubs across the country. So if you're tapped to be a WGA director, then your job is to work with all of the members at your individual club and help with fundraising and talk about the Evans Scholars Program, and then work with the caddies at your club directly. And the directors, they love it. It's a chance for them to become a personal mentor to these caddies. So if they're going out for a round of golf, then they will take a caddy. And then there's conversations that happen over that 4.5 hours on the golf course. And they'll talk about, you know, to a 15-year-old kid, hey, I'm a lawyer. And have you thought about going to school? What are your plans? What are you going to do? And so there's this conversation and this natural relationship that happens on the golf course, which is why caddying is such a unique job. And so there's this opportunity for the golfer to really mentor this kid and have them apply for the Evans Scholarship and then go to a selection meeting where they will, be awarded an Evans Scholarship. So there's, an opportunity for a really great relationship to form, but we couldn't do that. We can't be out at all of these country clubs ourselves. And so that's why we have this, a huge team of volunteers that really spread our message on our behalf, and we'll work with them. We give them training tools, and we have, direct webinars where we talk about the messages and talk about our plans and what we're trying to do this year. And this year was tough because there weren't caddy programs that were going on. And so we really had to work extra hard to make sure that the people at their clubs, even though this wasn't probably at the front of their mind, we had to really kind of, get that message out repeatedly that, hey, I know there may not be caddies at your club, but if you can find a way to call some of the caddies that were there last year and see if they can come back, and maybe they can't caddy in the traditional way, but they can caddy for you. So we had to come up with some new alternatives for kids and the directors to really find, a new way for them to work, because they need those rounds to be able to apply for the Evans Scholarship. And I'll say that there's good and bad that comes with working with such a big group of people that are essentially your messengers. They get it wrong sometimes. They'll say the wrong facts. They'll use the wrong logos on social media. If they're talking, because a lot of times they're the ones that are in their markets giving the media interviews. And so sometimes they'll say something where you're just kind of looking at the TV interview afterwards and you're like, but for the most part, when you look at the bigger picture, we do as much training as we can. We do as much media training and messaging training and all of this stuff. And their passion is really what kind of gets the message across. They may do it in different words than what you would use, but because they've got this one-on-one relationship with these kids, they know these kids, it means a lot to them. And so their motivation is different. It's more personal. And that's why, we have this huge core of volunteers that are so energetic and they love our organization. There's a lot of loyalty there. So we really try our best to organize that passion and to be able to help us get our message out. They do that at the club individual level.
I could jump in. I was in the pre-COVID world, and for 41 years, I wrote for the Chicago Tribune, and toward the last 10, 15 years, I wrote a column called Around Town. So I was pitched stories on a regular basis, charity groups and hospitals and organizations. And oftentimes they would use the sports angle to have a prominent athlete represent their organization. And I found the most authentic and effective cases there were when the athlete had some sort of story to tell that involved the organization that he was representing. So, perhaps he dealt with childhood cancer. Perhaps he grew up in the same neighborhood that he's trying to help out. Now, just obvious links like that would lend authenticity to the story. And you want a representative who's able to tell his or her story of how they got to where they got. It's nice to say that this person is a prominent athlete or coach or whatever, but what's your story? How did you get there? What were the challenges that you had when you were a child growing up, a teenager? All of these things add to the message that you're trying to ultimately get across, and really differentiates your story from somebody else's. So our society is attracted to the names of prominent people, first of all, to grab their attention. Then it's up to the organization to ensure that person is authentic, has a story to tell, and makes it relatable to everybody, so that people come away saying, oh, I didn't know that about this person. I had no idea he or she went through this. And this makes the story so much more effective. I can't tell you how many stories I wrote in columns that I wrote, leading off with a human interest type story that links into an organization's attempt to draw attention to what they're trying to achieve. So I know that times are different now, especially with the COVID. And times are different now in terms of messaging. But I tell my DePaul University students now that we have no way of knowing what communication medium we will have 20, 30 years from now, any more than I didn't know when I started out in the newspaper business that there was going to be an internet and social media and all these other ways to communicate. But I think the constant will be the fact that there will always be a need for people to tell entertaining, informative, authentic stories on whatever platform that might wind up on. So I think the message remains the same, regardless of whether we're talking about newspapers, blogs, magazines, you name it. The message remains the same.
I guess, John, can I ask a question?
Yes, me?
Yeah, no, actually to the group. But I definitely, from what Seth and Amy were mentioning before, at Sports Doing Good, when I'm contacted or if I come across a story, I just take the story, I highlight it. I put the name in and I provide the link to the article. So I'm not doing anything. I'm not really trying to I used to put like a little blurb with each story, but now it's just more the title and then the link. So I'm not repurposing it in any way. It's just serving as another platform, hopefully, so that more people see the article. So Seth and Amy, you started talking about this. How do you work with whoever that sort of outlet is about keeping your story sort of pure, where, that they don't take it in another direction that maybe you don't want it to go? Hopefully they do something positive no matter what. But even if it is positive, maybe they're emphasizing something that doesn't really speak to your organization. And Seth, the same thing. How do you say, when you work with college athletic departments, do they want to put out a release about, the young person they're working with, and how does that? So just talk about positioning and consistency in message when you're talking to kind of the publisher.
Yeah, I think that's always a tricky balance. And we have had a lot of hits over the years, and we've had a couple misses. I think for us, and that's probably my favorite part of what I do, is working with the media organizations to tell the story of our scholars. So every year, once they get awarded this full college and housing and tuition scholarship, we put out a press release, and we group them by state. So we might have, for example, 15 kids in the state of Missouri earned full college scholarships this year. And then we send out a press release with their name and their hometown, their high school, where they caddied. And then basically that will get picked up by local journalists. And we do have a PR firm that helps pitch directly to local reporters. I would say, for a long time, it was pretty easy. There were so many media. I think I take for granted now how easy it was for us to just get our story into the newspaper, because, full college scholarship, and we were able to position it in so many ways. We could take the angle of, college financial need and kids who are coming up with creative ways to get scholarships. And then you could go to the story that the scholar had themselves. So it was really easy looking back on it. And now I would say this year it's harder than ever, not just because of, the COVID restrictions, but because media outlets have significantly downsized. There's just not as many reporters now in their place. There's, influencers and bloggers, but they don't have the journalism training that you really need to be able to tell a fair, objective, unbiased story. And sometimes it's hard for me to trust the people out there. So I tend to, we've said no to outlets who we feel like won't maybe tell a fair story. And these are kids that have, gone through, as I mentioned, some adversity. So there's also an element of, confidentiality. So we want to be able to say to the reporter, hey, we've got a great story for you. This person's mom passed away. And then, this is how she died. But then there's also this is this scholar okay with us, with talking about this, and what is confidential? They went, maybe they had bankruptcy, or maybe they lost their home. And, we've had scholars that were homeless and had significant health issues and overcame all of this stuff. But it is kind of a tricky line to be able to talk with the scholar to say, hey, we would love for you to share your story and celebrate this great news, but we also are going to need you to talk about losing your mom and, how hard that was for you. So it's definitely a little bit of a tricky dance. And then, at the end of the day, you only have so much control over what the reporter and what the outlet will publish. And so it's, as I've mentioned, it's a little harder now. I feel like we have less control than we ever did, because there was one outlet, I think I've talked with some of you guys about this example, but we had a scholar that was interviewed by a reporter for a big outlet, and they really just it was just one of those instances where I think the scholar was just very regretful that they'd given the interview, because the reporter ended up pairing it with just this gotcha headline that really did not get to the heart of the scholar's story. And in our mind, we saw this as like a celebration of all the positive work and all of the adversity that they will overcome. And I think the reporter just kind of was trying to sensationalize things. The hard part was that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was that there was messaging, there was a message board. And so people were writing comments, and the story was on a young girl who had lost both of her parents. It was a murder-suicide. So it was very traumatic. And so you can imagine kind of the sensationalism that could come from a headline like that. And then her picture was also up, and then the picture of her with her deceased mom. And so the comments that came in were just so cruel, and it was just terrible. It was horrifying. And she called me crying, and she was like, how could people be this terrible? And it was something that I had never even thought about, these message boards and these comments from other people that were coming in suddenly, and we could not get them turned off. They wouldn't turn them off. It finally took a couple days, and I was begging with them to just please, you're causing this family so much pain. So after that was one of those incidents where I look back on it now and I'm like, you know what? Now we go moving forward. We're asking every outlet, and we make sure, now we check, do you have messages? Do you allow people to write in, comments on the story? Because if you do, then we're going to be a lot more hesitant, to deal with you. So that's definitely changed in this, environment now of fake news. Anybody can say anything they want. That's hurt us. That's hurt us as an organization. So we just have to be very careful about the story that we're sending out. And, we have a lot of minority students too. And I think there's a very fine line when you're trying to tell the story of a minority student who's gone through a lot. And there's some reporters that we've met that, again, it kind of goes to the sensationalism or playing up certain aspects of stories where we've had this experience, and then the scholar will come back to me and say, you know what, I understand what the reporter was trying to do. They were trying to say that, I was rescued from this terrible neighborhood, but you got to understand that I don't look at it as that. I just look at it as how I grew up. This is just my neighborhood. And when my neighbors are reading the story and seeing all of these things that I'm saying about them, it just doesn't sit well with me. And so there's been a lot of lessons learned from that end. So it's a constantly evolving process, but I will say that this year has kind of made it harder than ever.
Yeah, can I just ask about that? To your point in friends about how much you rely on these personal stories, which I imagine is very effective in drawing attention. Do you find with media, as you said, being so accessible as it is, for better or worse, some reluctancy? Is it harder for you to find folks, athletes, Fred, or scholars, as you said, Amy, who are willing to tell those personal stories? And if so, what kind of adjustments are you making to make that something people are more comfortable doing?
I think one important thing that Amy sort of referenced is because of the changing landscape of the media world, it's probably more difficult for people like you to develop a long-term relationship with certain media who would write a story like that, because that helps a lot when you get to know the reporters and you can sort of let them know in a certain way what type of approach you're looking for, just discussing the same things that you're talking about now. Because when you get somebody that you don't know, and maybe it's a young person who's trying to make a name for himself or herself as a journalists by sensationalizing a story that doesn't deserve that. So I think it's important for a relationship to try to be creative with these people who are writing these stories over a long period of time. That worked for me, and it worked for the people who were trying to get their messages across.
I think that's a really good point. I think for us, like I think in certain consumer brands, other places, like any story is good advertisement. Mm-hmm. I think like in our sector, like, you have to be really, really careful that even though you want your story out there, even though you want to pitch it, even though you're like, we're both talking about kids, we're both talking about young adults, we're both talking about very vulnerable populations. Like, you never want to feel like you're putting someone on a stage or, telling their story that's not authentic. Or, and I think for us, like, I think we have, in some ways we've struggled getting our story out there to the media outlets. Some of that's been intentional, other has not, but I think that you have to kind of realize that they're going to spin it in a way to make it work for their story. And so what we, obviously we send the boilerplate, we make sure they have the facts right. We do as much due diligence up front. We template everything so they have as much information they can just copy and paste from it. We also know that, they're going to then have the authentic way. Either it's one of our athletes telling a story or one of our kids telling a story. So the more that you can like protect yourself from all the information being correct, I think is best, but realizing that you're kind of a little bit of a slippery slope of allowing, that person who you hopefully can trust to kind of extend it to their audience.
Yeah, and I would say we do a lot of our own in-house storytelling video-wise that we maybe hadn't done a few years ago. So what we'll do is, we recognize that we want to be able to tell this person's story in the way that we feel is the best for us, and also that makes the scholar comfortable. So what we'll say is, hey, would you mind sitting down with us, not a media person, and just share your story and share how the Evans Scholarship has impacted your life. And there's a comfort level there because they know that we're going to protect them, and we would obviously edit out anything that got too uncomfortable. And then, if we are on a video shoot, I'll go the day before and I talk with the family. I make sure that, everybody's comfortable, everybody's understanding what we're trying to do, that it's okay if they're emotional. And I feel like that's been very helpful trying to establish that rapport, but then them knowing that I'm not a reporter, I'm not going to do anything that's going to hurt them, that usually provides a comfort level where we can get some, real honest, vulnerable talking about how the scholarship has impacted their lives. And then what we'll do is we'll show them the video beforehand, and then, sometimes we'll use it at one of our fundraising events or at a gala, for example, and then we'll have, we'll supplement them with the scholar being in person, and then also giving a 2-minute in-person speech. So that's what we've done in past years. And then what we've done is taken that video and then sent it out to media afterwards. And a lot of times they'll say, hey, this video was fantastic. We're just going to use snippets of this and then we'll do our own interview. And so it kind of, gives them this foundation already. And we've done a lot of the work. So we kind of that takes that off their plate. And honestly, this year, reporters have been very appreciative. They don't have as much time. There's just not as many of them. And so a lot of them will just take what we've given them and then maybe they'll do their own quick interview. But a lot of that work has already been done by us. And then that allows us to control the narrative a little bit more.
It's terrific idea. And about probably 15, 20 years ago, I was the first one in the Tribune Sports Department to use our phones for camera to interview people. And that was my emphasis and message was when you put somebody on video to accompany a written story online, it enhances it and it protects, in my case, the journalist, and it protects the person that you're interviewing by having that person display his or her emotions and words and control that so it's not spun a different way. I really like that idea, and I think it's so important to be able to do that, whether you do it yourself or have the reporter interview and maybe tell the person ahead of time, I'm just going to ask you 3 or 4 questions about blah, blah, blah. So they're not caught off guard. And it could be a 30-second interview or a minute and a half, whatever. and get your points across. And it's not taken out of context because you can hear the questions, you can hear the answers, you can see the expression on a person's face, whether they were sad or smiling or joking or whatever. When you do that and accompany it with the written work, it's much more powerful, very much so.
Yeah, just to remind the folks there in the audience there, feel free to type any questions in the chat. I think we've got about 15 minutes left here. So if there's any questions you have for the panel, stick them in the chat there.
I would say too, this year has been really interesting. And I think one of the biggest lessons from this year is that, everything we did this year, we just did not know for sure if it was going to work.
Hello?
Hi, sorry about that. I don't know what happened.
No, it just, the meeting ended. I don't know what happened. It said somebody else was using the account. So maybe we're done.
Strange.
Oh, technology.
I know. I mean, I feel like that kind of segues, perfectly into what I was saying is that there's been so many, this whole year has really just been, an experiment in everything. And there's been so many instances where, we feel like we've got everything going on just as planned and then something will happen. And so I think like the biggest lesson for me, I would just say is that this whole year has been an experiment, and there's going to be things that worked really well and things that didn't work really well. And so I constantly just told my team, you know what, we've got to try this because this is going to be a great opportunity for us to really, do things that maybe we were scared to do before. And now we've got this opportunity where pretty much anything goes because we're in this, year of let's try anything. Let's see what sticks. Let's see, how we can do things a little bit differently. And so it was this really great opportunity for us. We're a more conservative organization. We had to work to get a lot of people who maybe weren't comfortable with filming video messages, for example, to get comfortable doing that. And I would say that I'm really proud of how, we pushed people and how, everybody just kind of now understands that, video and online and all of these different avenues, social media, influencers, all of these things, like these are the norm now. So things are changing so quickly that I kind of really tell my staff, like, please don't focus on mistakes. We're all going to make mistakes. But the bigger thing is that we feel comfortable experimenting, knowing that some of this stuff may not work. We're doing I'll give an example. We're doing a Steps for Scholarship online digital initiative where we sent out an email to everybody. We're encouraging them to take, steps to be able to get prizes, and then you have to pay $50 and you'll get this cool Evans Scholars branded hat, and then you have to record your steps through an app. And this was following this fantastic idea we had in the spring when the novelty was still there. People didn't know, what it was like, and so everybody signed up to do this initiative where it was like the online 5K. We were one of the first organizations to do that. People were so excited. So they went outside and they did their 5Ks, and then you logged the results in, and that worked out well. We raised a ton of money. I feel like, now it's a different time where however many months into this pandemic and people are a little bit tired of the online fundraisers now. And so, the Steps for Scholarships probably is just not going to be as successful as the other thing. Plus, we told people we made them go to a different app. And I think there might've been some confusion as to like where they were supposed to go to log the results. Plus it's November and nobody wants to take steps outside. So, it was one of those things where this may not work out as well as we had hoped that it did, but at least we tried. And now we know from our audience what this feedback is. We know that, maybe we've reached our, we're getting tired of doing some of these online initiatives. And so we need to focus more now on the straight auction, because we've got this amazing auction with all of these different golf items and specialty stuff and signed gear. So let's put our focus and energy into that right now. It's not worth kind of, focusing too much more on the Steps initiative. Let's just go straight for the auction. And, today, I don't know if you guys had heard, but at least in Illinois, there's going to be further restrictions on what we can have for indoor dining. And so that obviously affects one of our huge events where we were selling tables to this hybrid event. It's supposed to be a half in person with our biggest donors. And then the other part of the event is going to be like a Zoom engagement event. And now we may have to just kind of make it all Zoom. So it's one of those things where, things are changing literally up to the last minute, and we put in all this time and effort for something, and then it could be changed. And so I think we just really try to have like a positive attitude going into it, knowing like, hey, this all might be blown up by next week. But we have to try, because we have to like get into the habit of really thinking outside of the box, really thinking progressively and creatively, because something will stick. Or if it doesn't stick, then that at least tells us a little bit more about our audience, so we know what other direction to go in.
That's great. Yeah, I think the more flexible you are these days, the better off everyone is. And I think the one storytelling element I think that goes with that is that we do all have this shared experience right now. So everything that you're describing, you're going through is relatable to everyone. So if there's nothing else that we can all agree that we're participating in, it is in the fact that we're going through this very strange year together. So. I'd love to hear too from anyone in the audience any things you've done differently. To Amy's point about how messaging has changed with the lack of accessibility that we have in being in person. If anybody has any personal experiences to share that way. Other than that, we just all got kicked off of a Zoom call for no reason that we understand.
I know. So, something interesting. Oh, go ahead.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Ebony, coming from you live from the very cold Detroit. How are you guys today?
Great.
We're in Chicago. We're not much warmer than you, Ebony.
Oh, I understand. Yeah, just to your point, your question, I am a sports philanthropist with the PGA Tour stopping here in Detroit, called the Rocket Mortgage Classic, and we had to shift our entire tournament during the pandemic and make it a media only. So we weren't allowed to have fans, of course, but we also had to shift our charitable giving program as well. And so we came up with this initiative called Changing the Course. And so we raised about $2.7 million and invested it back into our city to build technology hubs. We also purchased technical devices for some of our students who didn't attend public schools. And we also are creating digital literacy programming, and we developed a Connect 313 digital fund as well. So we're doing a lot of things that's still currently being rolled out, but that was all stemmed from the coronavirus and us having a media-only event.
That's awesome, Ebony. I feel like we did that too with our BMW. We ended up, because we couldn't have spectators, we had a match play challenge, which was like a 9-hole charity event, and we had 4 players that were competing. And they did all these different formats on different holes. And then whoever had the most points by the end of the 9-hole exhibition, they were, I think there was like 125,000 or whatever the amount was that would be donated to Evans Scholars. And we couldn't, normally our kids would caddy for the golfers, but obviously they couldn't do that this year. So they basically walked alongside as standard bearers. But what was really cool was that in a normal year, we would announce our Evans Scholar of the Year at a summer banquet that was held prior to our BMW championship. But this year, what we ended up doing was we got Bryson DeChambeau, one of the PGA Tour players, surprised our Evans Scholar. So he basically went to meet her, and this was all done outside. And so he went to meet her, and he gave her a caddy jersey, and then he's like, hey, what does that say? And then so she flipped it over, and it said Evans Scholar of the Year. And so she's looking at it, and this was all captured on film, but she was looking at it and she was like, oh my gosh. So we got such a great reaction. And then that really kind of became one of the, most heavily used clips that we put out on social media. And it was really exciting for her because she was such a great sport about it. And she had like the perfect reaction to everything. So, I mean, that turned out to be a really cool experiment where we were able to incorporate one of the players in announcing some of our biggest news for our scholars. And all the proceeds from BMW, benefit Evans Scholars. So it was a really nice creative way to tie the two together. But yes, that wouldn't have happened in any other year because we wouldn't have had that opportunity. So
that's awesome. Bryson's actually our reigning 2020 champion. So we love him here in Detroit.
Very cool.
Awesome. Thanks, Ebony. Any other contributions from the audience there, and some success stories that came out of all this madness? Brandon?
Hello, I'm Brandon. I'm a student board member for a program called Boys on the Right Track over here, and I'm the very first one. And we have been trying to get engagement, athletes participating on social media, but we only have the parents like interacting. So we have been trying to find ways to get the athletes involved, because the parents are the ones seeing all of our posts, seeing everything. The athletes are not seeing a thing.
Brandon, so one thing that we're trying to do more, we host 4 amateur tournaments too. So these are, golfers that all have their own social media accounts, but maybe they're not as huge as the PGA Tour players. But what we'll do is we'll send messages out, whether it's, happy birthday, Dan Smith, who won our, Western Amateur, and then we link it to them, and then we also send them the graphics so that they can, share it on their own social media accounts, almost as kind of like a, hey, remember it was so cool, I won this event back in, a few years ago. And so we basically try to do as much content sharing as possible, because we've got a really good in-house designer, and we don't want that to go to waste. We don't want the players or whoever we're talking about, to not use this and to miss this opportunity. So we will send emails out to these players and to, even the bigger players too. And we'll just say, hey, we created this. Feel free to share this on your social media account. And a lot of times it works. Doesn't always work, but we've had some good success doing that. And I feel like in the future that's going to just continue to become more important, because as there's fewer journalists, and so we really have to take advantage of these influencers and these other social media ambassadors and really share our content. So that's something that we're continuing to focus on as we head into the next year, is just this idea of content sharing. And we're creating it, but we're going to give you, we'll give you the messaging, we'll give you the photos, we'll give you everything if you can just put it out there.
Awesome. Thanks, Brandon.
Well, John, it just as we, I guess, approach the end, just a quick statement about the stories that are out there. I try to highlight maybe 15 to 20 stories every couple of weeks, and I can tell you, even with the pandemic going on, and really true over the last 8 years, I've never had a problem finding stories. So I think that speaks to the fact there is a lot of good stuff out there. I think people are doing great work and continues to increase. So even when we're dealing with a tough situation like the pandemic, certainly with racial issues as well, over the last eight or 9 months. Again, from my angle is that I say sports doing good, and it's broad, right? So an athlete or athletes stepping up and talking about social justice, that gets included, right? So to what everyone was saying was, even if it doesn't seem like it might be something of interest, it probably is in some way. And I think it gets to, John, your point about storytelling. How do you tap into that trend or that issue that's maybe standing out in the public marketplace, and then how do you attach your story to that in the proper way? But how do you attach your story to that so that someone like me will look at it and go, oh yeah, okay, there's a lot of we see a lot of people doing stuff with respect to protesting and advocacy. Some of them are athletes, some of them are teams, some of them are team owners. So I look at that as like, okay, here's something that's in my endemic space. I'm able to use that. So it's a great positive. I think storytelling will just get that much more important. But it is something that I've noticed over the last 8 years, and I'm happy about it. That there are more places publishing sort of these positive stories, even in light of the issues that we're dealing with today.
Well, that's great. Yeah, and because of those issues too. I mean, certainly we've seen this year just the dam burst open in terms of sports and athletes really taking these stands publicly, and I think it's all for the better. I think it's just it's a whole other venue for the stories to be told, right? And so if anything good can come out of things slowing down in a lot of ways, maybe it's forced us to focus on things and really be reflective of how we feel about it.
Yeah, this year was a very interesting year. I realized that crisis communications is a huge part of storytelling as well. So
Great point. Great point.
Lots of good lessons learned this year. I will say that.
Well, I'll be so much smarter when it's done. Well, that brings us to 5 o'clock. So I guess we got to make room for whoever's next. But thanks for those who hung on. So I'm not sure what happened when we got kicked off, but I thought that was a great conversation, and I certainly enjoyed it.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Very nice to talk with you. Take care.
Take care.
Thank you all. Bye.
Bye.